I'm here with Jonathan Ozeran. He's a product designer at Rexlu. Can you give us a brief history about yourself and how you got started in the app design world?
I've been a part of the application space for a while across a number of different industries, starting primarily with media, having done a few things with social platforms as they evolved, Facebook platform particularly. Before that was building applications that made infrastructure available in ways that provided that data for any type of application to use. From media, that led me to a number of different industries to try and solve problems through mobility. So that was construction, automotive, field service, and now currently trying to solve the opportunity, at least, for campus recruiting and university recruiting, how you apply mobility to that.
So you said you come from the web world, right? I mean, you built social applications on the website. So how was the transition going from web to mobile? Was it easy? Was it hard? Are there certain things about the mobile aspects that just, provide things that are not offered on the website?
I think coming from the web world, you want to expose content in a way that's valuable and useful socially, of course, with the social platforms. But with mobility, you have to be thinking about how those users are going to use the application, when, with what device capabilities, and to ease into that. So exposing the data and making it available is one thing, and doing it securely and reliably. Going forward, you get to focus as a product designer on how those applications can best solve those problems for those end users.
So what are some of the challenges you face as an application designer when you're solving a problem? Like, what are the tools that you have to solve those problems?
So I think for me, with business applications in particular, you want to have dialogues and conversations with the end users. You don't want to make too many assumptions. You want to be able to rapidly iterate your product, have a version that's shipped and out there in the hands of users. And part of one of the most rewarding things for me in enterprise mobility is to be able to issue that application out to someone or deploy it, so that you can actively get that feedback. With consumer-facing apps, you can do it, but you have to wait. You may not get the feedback from the users you're expecting, and it's a whole different challenge.
So do you still do a beta release with an enterprise application like you would do with a consumer?
Sure.
I mean, it's harder to do with a consumer app on the mobile side, at least on the Apple ecosystem.
Sure. In my experience, I've seen pilot groups work really well, where you have some champions or even cheerleaders who are very excited about the initiative and want to support it out of the gate. And then they want to get stories and testimonials and examples to go move forward and make it a larger deployment.
So do you find on the enterprise side, are there more political barriers to get an app out? Because you can't just, I mean, on the consumer side, I have an idea, I put it out there and I see if it's successful or not. I mean, it's of course, there's a long road for me to go from point A to point B. But on the enterprise side, it seems like point A, you have the idea, but you have to gain consensus or the political clout to put that idea to fruition and in the hands of your consumers, which are your enterprise users.
So I've had the luxury of having those champions, whether they're CIOs, CMOs, heads of business, heads of technology, and even IT, really create that path that the organization might be able to benefit from, and really, I suppose, get around some of those typical obstacles. I think the challenge is really getting all of the users that are going to use the application out in the field to enjoy it, to think, this is the only way forward. I never want to go back and fall into my old routine and my old habit. So that's, I think, most of the challenge with product design in the enterprise. You're certainly going to run up against obstacles where organizations it's maybe the first foray into enterprise mobility. They don't know how to do device management and provisioning quite well, or this is their first application for it. But those are things you can ease into and solve as long as communication is strong between groups.
Now, have you found that enterprises are, I would not say reluctant, but is it that there are certain things the mobile side can do that the web cannot for an enterprise? Because, I mean, there's always that question, right? Like, why should I go mobile or native for developers? Why don't I just create a web app and just put a wrapper around it and make it native?
Many of the applications that I've been a part of focus on convenience, focused on solving a problem in a way that the user doesn't have to even worry about thinking, how do I use this application? I pick it up and innately know it's going to help me. It's going to be something I can respond to quickly you don't have to worry about. I don't get lost in a sea of icons and buttons and text strings and et cetera. It's now just second nature, much like a lot of the applications that we've come to understand on a consumer side.
Can you give us an example?
On the enterprise side, I think one in particular, being able to have applications that allow you to collect information about energy audits, as an example. Right, you're going to go out into a field setting, and maybe you do this 3 or 4 times a day, and you're traveling to do it. You might use a clipboard, you might use a piece of paper to collect that information. And that information, for one, can be lost if you lose the piece of paper. Right. 2, if it rains, you lose the information that you spent hours and potentially a lot of money collecting. And you can't share it immediately. It has to be faxed or scanned or copied or emailed. And typically you see coordinators involved in that process to make sure the information funnels into whatever back-end systems appropriately. With an iPad, with a data plan, or with a reliable Wi-Fi connection, you can create an input that makes this seamless, that you use elements of UI design and human interface guidelines that Apple has created, for example, that make this application as easy as picking up the Settings app, for example, on the device that's built in.
Right. So you mentioned, energy audits. That seems like a very dry application because you're just collecting data. So how important is design? When I say design, I really mean like making it beautiful or pretty. Is that important in an enterprise app, or is that time that, enterprises say like, we don't really care to spend all that time in making it pretty?
Absolutely. So that's the fun part of being a product designer in the enterprise. You get to surprise and delight. You get to decide what is that threshold of functionality, focus, laser focus for that particular version of the application. And what are those special features or special visual nuances that will really, down the line when someone's using the application for that 6th hour in a row, it'll make it easier on them. It'll just be something that they go, that was really special. That was nice to see in an application that will pay off in the long run, because they won't use the application once and put it away. They're going to come back to it. And repeat use is really important and a very hard problem in the enterprise to solve. Well,
I mean, they have to repeatedly use the app because that is something that's part of their job now.
Ideally, but I've also seen in situations where an application is out there, the enterprise has solved the deployment issue, number of devices out in the field, and you have end users who, for whatever reason, are more comfortable using the old approach, the paper, the clipboard,
the pen and paper.
And they may take a device that was purchased, a very expensive device, and send it home for the kids to play with. And so you're always up against that challenge of top of mind, rapid iteration, improving the functionality, improving the usability. You're never really going to nail it on the first version.
So it is important to have good user experience and good design, and even on the enterprise side.
Absolutely. I think you have to be thinking about those primary use cases that your application end users are going to need. You of course have to solve some of the problems of getting the data in the formats you need and exposing it securely and reliably. But ultimately, it's that interface that someone's going to use when they walk away from their desk, when they're out in the field. In our case, we have end users who are standing for hours and hours and hours collecting information in a much more reliable way where they can share it and it can be available in real time and provide some analytics that have never been available before.
So what are some of the key takeaways between the consumer and the enterprise app side of things? I mean, of course, there's a pros and cons on each side.
I think with consumer, you get to decide or even paint the picture of the personas that you think are going to use the application. When you put something in the App Store or in Android Market, now Play, you don't really know necessarily who's going to download your app and be that end user. With the enterprise, you get to do more upfront research, conversation, and understand the psychology of the problem and understand the psychology of the end user. Where are they going to grow frustrated? Will it be easy the first time they pick up the app, and will it be as easy the 7th time they pick up the app and start using it? So those are some things that you have to balance between consumer and enterprise. Distribution and management, of course, with the consumer side, you have the App Store and you have some review processes. In enterprise, if you own all the devices and manage them, you can distribute whatever you want immediately and it's just generally available.
Oh, okay.
So you have some perks in terms of iterating your product. You discover a bug or a crash, you can solve it nearly instantaneously and roll out a new version.
And there's none of that Apple App Store filter, right? Because
certain ways to distribute applications, custom B2B apps, for example, there are some routes that expose that and make that available as an option. In my experience, I've seen the enterprise distribution model more often.
What advice would you give to someone that's kind of starting out with app development? Should they be like looking at focusing either side or just start building apps?
It's important to look back and see how things have progressed and iterated over time. I think there are some development, even design considerations you would have made in 2008, 2009 that are vastly different here in 2012. And a year from now will probably be even more unique in nature. So from a design and development perspective, keep the evolution of the platform in mind to see how you can make the best decisions versus having to run into some obstacles previously solved and encountered.
Can you give us an example on that?
Sure. So there are some new things that are, and this is timely, with iOS 6 that have become available in terms of how to flow rows and columns, for example.
With the auto layout stuff.
Layouts, exactly, and some of the frameworks that are now available. You'd have to find a better way to do that on your own. You may have asked some of your peers and community members, what's the route that you suggest to take. Now things have evolved where that challenge has been hit so many times, it's now part of the platform. So I think there's a lot of examples of this, whether it's accessibility to the camera, making the flash available, the little nuances that will frustrate a developer to an endless amount that are now ironed out with some of that time.
Oh, it makes it easier also. I mean, because like when Objective-C, you had to manually manage all that memory, exactly. And now you don't, So it's becoming easier and easier to become an iOS developer.
Sure, and with Arc, to your point, with memory management, and now some of the new features of Xcode 4.5 that allow you to do the auto-synthesize of all the instance, it's great. But it also takes some of the understanding away, and it makes it automatic. Yes. So if you're getting into it for the first time, you kind of want to go back and go, all right, and I can see why they've done this, and I can see why it took so long to make that happen magically.
It's also easy to just skip that too sometimes as a new developer.
True. I also think for folks that are just getting into this space, it's really important to understand why they're doing this. I think there's a lot of excitement around programming in general, which is great around the world. People want to understand the startup culture, think it might be something for them. But it's also a two-edged sword. I think you have to keep in mind why you're doing this. Is it exciting? Why are you passionate about it?
Right.
Why is it fun? Because otherwise you're not going to create the best solution and you're just going to become one of a sea of developers out there. You really want to change the game, specifically in the enterprise. You want to create the best solution for a problem. On the consumer side, you want to create the best application for that particular use case that you're really passionate about.
So that's interesting because that plays right into my next question, which is, because you've built a lot of teams of developers and designers. So what are some of the things that you look for in a good developer?
I think,
and then good designer, of course.
Of course, I really like designers who want to be developers and developers who want to be designers. I think that's been a really unique scenario that I've seen play out a couple times. You always want to understand what you don't know, and vice versa. And kind of being in the middle of that, where I've actively developed in the past, and now I focus on the product design more often. It's a unique set of traits, and it's even a unique opportunity to share stories, to share experiences with one another. And in a community setting, you really want to have all those different pieces available to you to learn the most and to have the most opportunity.
So when you're looking to hire a good developer, what is that one thing that kind of stands out? Are you just reading their resume? I mean, it's like when you're talking, it's intuition, of course, when you're interviewing that developer, but there's something that someone always looks for, and everyone has their own little quirks, what they look for.
So I would say, as a startup, and I can't speak to the other sides of it, and certainly we're helping our customers, Fortune 1000 and others, recruit and retain the best talent in the world. I think from a startup perspective, you need to have people that are almost like family, or even family. You want people who are passionate and excited about what they do, and could not be doing anything else. It's their dream. I've had folks express to me, I am living my dream. And that's, I think, what the hardest thing to find is.
But you can't really measure the passion, though, when you're interviewing someone.
I think during the interview process itself, you have to be meticulous. You have to involve not just yourself, but a number of your other teammates. Because if you bring in the wrong element, it can ruin the organization, it can ruin the product, it can set you off course for quite some time. Technically, there's many different ways to assess your capabilities, your expertise. I don't want to speak necessarily to those. There's a number of opportunities out there that code evaluations and tests and bring someone into a room and whiteboard challenges.
Do you do any of those?
Certainly, we've done a number of different things over time, but for me, I'm most particular about the passion and energy level and excitement about why you are looking to make these contributions in the group or the organization I'm with.
But sometimes you're starting out as a developer, right? I mean, you've never developed an iPhone app and you just started learning it and you want to get the opportunity to get into a good place where you can shine. So
I've seen very successful internships where folks come in with a miscellaneous set of experiences, whether it's Python, maybe dabbled in Ruby, messed around in Xcode occasionally, but doesn't really understand how interface builder works. Storyboards is sort of intimidating. But those are things you can ramp up pretty quickly when you have the fundamentals, when you have the basics, and when you have that passion behind you.
What about designers, you know?
Designers, I've had wonderful success working with folks who have started in the print world. I think print world takes into account different lighting, different scenarios where this is going to be consumed, different fonts and typography, understanding layout, and as auto layout, for example, changes the way you interact with an application on device to device, that becomes even more important. So on the design side, print is a really good place to start.
That's very interesting that you say print, because print is so static. And you know, the mobile world is so visceral. It's like you have to touch, feel, there's animation. It's like totally different medium too.
I think what's interesting to me, print is limited screen real estate to me, right? It may be a piece of paper, however the interface exposes itself. You have content that you need to deliver in a certain way and message a certain way, much like with a web app, mobile app, social app. You want to convey something. It might be dynamic information, it might be static. You still have to create that experience. You want the user to be completely immersed in that experience. And I think that's where some of that print experience comes through.
So you see that designer go from print to mobile, their transitions pretty fluid, or they serve challenges? Or?
Sure, in my experience, it's been very helpful to have that coming in. The other interesting thing that I've observed, you want to know exactly what element of design you want to focus on. It's important not to bundle everyone into one bucket, right? So UI, UX, motion design, you probably don't want one person to do all three. You really want to focus on the usability, how you progress from screen to screen, from path to path. Folks are going to be focused on putting on a wall, for example, all the different paths a user can take so they don't get lost, they don't get frustrated. And then you're going to want to apply artistry. You're going to want to apply a layer of polish and magic, and that's where the UI comes in. And once you've had those pieces put together, and with the blessing of your development team, or unless you're kind of a hybrid design developer, you're going to want to pull in a motion designer to really take the story end to end, put the storyboards together to say, here's how it's solving a problem, here's how this application can now do something that has not been able to be done before, and allow you to create a foundation to work from, that version 1 on.
Lastly, I want to touch a bit on analytics, because I know you've done a bit of this too. What are some of the key metrics that you look for when you're building an app and putting it out there, and some of the things that app developers should consider when they put out a consumer app, or even an enterprise app for that matter?
I've also been able to see the evolution of social and mobile app analytics.
Okay.
So it's been interesting to see how Google Analytics, and Omniture, now part of Adobe, and Flurry, and amongst other solutions out there, are made available to solve this analytics problem, to expose information available that you can create the next best product feature. You can maybe remove a feature if it's not being used and no longer is relevant. I think for enterprise applications, the more you can take in, the more you can understand, the more you can track from a server perspective, the more value you'll get. So when we're trying to determine those KPIs, those key performance indicators, we're doing it from a system perspective. This one mobile application is just one consumer of an API. It's a third-party client. And we want to understand it uniquely, but it's just one third party. I may have other applications I'm creating for different devices and different users. So it's really important to design an infrastructure, design an architecture that's flexible. You can do event tracking, you could do screen tracking, page tracking, whatever it might be. And there's a wealth of solutions out there, or you can build your own.
So I know you mentioned Google Analytics and Flurry. Do you have anything one over the other, or? equally good, or?
I think it really depends. From a mobile analytics perspective, you don't want anything to really bog down the application. So you'll want things to be intelligently dispatching those, the data collection, right? You're going to want to use the best, maybe third-party frameworks or plugins that might be out there to be able to collect this information. In our case, we do some of this a little bit more custom, so as to make the interface never lock, never impose a restriction from a UI perspective where a user can't go from one screen to another. So it just depends, I guess, on the user and the application.
So, like going back to some of the key performance indicators, do you recommend like tracking opens, installs? You mentioned events, like what kind of events?
One particular
Insights into
application
that.
I'll give you as a kind of reference point was an application that was designed to find the stars on the Hollywood Walk of Fame in Los Angeles. And I thought it would be remarkable, whether it was using an application with a search interface for iPhone, or even this was an augmented reality optimized app, so I could hold it up in Los Angeles and see where the stars were, and it would allow me to, it would walk me there. I wanted to know who was doing that. It was a very experimental feature, brand new to the device. It was trendy. I didn't think a lot of people were going to start using it. This is in the case of Los Angeles Times. We're going to apply some marketing efforts to it and street teams. And I wanted to see how the application use would evolve, would change, depending on how those marketing tactics were applied.
Oh, wow.
And so this application was essentially end-to-end supported by analytics. I could see screen by screen how users were going from one to the next. If they were going from Bill Cosby to the next star, whatever it might be, I could follow along with their unique app experiences. And while I didn't know the particular person, each of those experiences told a different story. And so I could see how people found their way through search, found their way through the augmented reality, scenarios where the GPS wasn't enabled, the device didn't have a GPS. All of those things become data points for you to create the next best iteration or best product.
So did that help you actually evolve the product
Certainly.
over time and
Absolutely.
add features or remove features?
Definitely. And we also had the advantage of those street teams getting conversations back to the development team, back to the design team to share those stories.
Oh, so you had people on the ground talking to these?
That was helpful as well.
Oh,
Yeah. And in
okay.
enterprise, it's infinitely helpful as well. Yeah.
Thanks, Jonathan, for doing this. This was very insightful for us.
It was my
Thank you.
pleasure.